Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do thank the Chair and the Ranking Member for having this hearing today, and I want to thank all of you for being here as well. It's been pretty enlightening. I think it's an important hearing. I'm happy to hear that there has been a lot of focus on rural areas, both sides of the aisle. We represent, many of us on this committee represent significant rural areas. So I'm going to get right to my first question. Ms. Bennett, in your testimony, you state that T-Mobile has, and I quote, determined that it is better for its business to do without any coverage in rural areas, unquote. As a representative of a rural district, not as big as some of them, but nonetheless pretty darn big, 12, 13,000 square miles, 24 counties, where coverage can often be dismal or non-existent. I get around my district all the time. I experience this whenever I'm back. I find that particular assertion very worrying, as you might imagine. Can you clarify a little bit more on that point?
Certainly, and I appreciate the question. Our members who have built out the rural networks in their rural areas, and it's not everywhere, to be clear, it's only in the areas that they serve.
And you did mention Iowa in your testimony.
Yes. And what has happened is in negotiations with T-Mobile, T-Mobile elects not to, they lack restrict. It's a technology that you can put in place so that their customers don't have access to those rural carriers' networks. So they have roaming agreements because under the FCC's rules, they have to let the rural carriers' customers roam on their network, but not the reciprocal. So that they choose not to do that, and that's because they probably don't want to pay the roaming charges to the rural carriers.
Well, if T-Mobile and Sprint are combining services, can T-Mobile make a structural commitment to use Sprint's rural carrier service model?
Those are very hard to enforce after the fact, and to go back to the favorable agreements that we have with Sprint right now, those are expiring, and we haven't been able to get any certainty from Sprint about whether those would continue, regardless of whether the merger goes through. They've just been silent. They've gone silent on us and have told us that we have to wait until the merger is done.
Okay.
Or not done.
Thank you. My second question is from Mr. Shelton. CWA recently released a report on the impact in Iowa from T-Mobile's acquisition of iWireless, which has been mentioned. One of the things that stuck out to me from this report was a dramatic decrease of T-Mobile's retail footprint in Iowa. Can you expand a little further regarding T-Mobile's acquisition of iWireless and how that reduced access in rural parts of my state and district?
Yes, when they bought the company in Iowa, they closed down 90% of the stores, and now for a consumer in Iowa, in a rural place in Iowa, they have to drive 68 to 100 miles to get to the nearest T-Mobile store in Iowa. And if you look at the company's plans, their own plans say that 46 million rural customers will not be served by their 5G network. So that does not bode well for Iowa.
And actually, I know it's kind of difficult in this political environment to demonstrate fairness, but I'm going to do it in this case, Mr. Ledger. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond and make your case because, to be frank, Ms. Bennett's and Mr. Shelton's remarks leave me very concerned about the potential negative outcomes in Iowa. I know there are at least two sides to every story, so I want to give you a chance to respond to them. And in particular, will T-Mobile make structural commitments to rural constituents of my state who may stand to lose jobs, coverage, or retail services?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And the facts associated with what's happening with Iowa Wireless, I'd be glad to submit after the hearing as well. But let's just be clear. There are 100 more employees than there were a year ago in Iowa. There are 35 Metro PCS, Metro by T-Mobile stores, equaling the number of what the stores were there before. And Iowa Wireless was a failing company stuck in 2G and 3G, and we came in and provided the investment. We spent $70 million so far upgrading to the 4G and now moving to 5G network.
I am kind of running out of time here. I want you to address the structural agreement issue going forward.
I'd be glad to look at ways to make that commitment, and I would point out that part of our plan is to cover 96% of the 62 million people in rural America with LTE coverage and 84% of all of rural America with greater than 25 megabits of in-home broadband.
And a group of politicians here, we make promises quite a lot. I would like this to be in writing. It's what I'd like it to be. I'd like to see you make that commitment, that structural commitment, to make sure that we have that access here in Iowa. Thank you very much, Mr. Ledger. We've got 10 seconds left. I'm going to yield back my time, Mr. Chair.